Hello everybody, it's Merlin here, and welcome to another segment here. This is going to be all things anime. Basically, it's going to be a segment where I discuss, obviously, various anime topics. And so I decided to start this off with something that I thought was very appropriate. It was actually going to be one of the various videos I tried to do, echoing my 1,000 subscriber landmark, which I'm above that now, but it's still something I feel like celebrating, and I've gotten a bit delayed because I kind of set myself in the schedule, but I'm just going to continue the celebration, basically. So today we're going to discuss my experience with Dragon Ball, how I got into it, kind of expressing my love for it, kind of sort of my history with the Dragon Ball experience, and I'm kind of inspired by Jorishae. He did a little video a while ago about this topic, and so I thought, that's a pretty good idea, kind of experiencing your personal feelings about the series and how you kind of came across it and how it kind of evolved and the relationship between me and the series. And it's kind of cool. I mean, of course I could have like a random Dragon Ball discussion about everything, but I think I'll just kind of take you guys through a little journey about the history of this series and me. Obviously, Dragon Ball, as most of you guys know, is one of my favorite anime and manga series of all time. I mean, I freaking love it. I mean, it's of course one of the most popular, influential, and most beloved series of all time, and I think for mostly with good reason. Yeah, it has its flaws, and heck, I might even do a video about the flaws. I mean, I feel like great pieces of entertainment or just art in general, even the greatest pieces of music or movies or whatever, have some kind of flaw because art reflects life after all, and let's face it, people and the world we inhabit, it's not perfect. But let's face it, the struggle is what makes it interesting. So, not going to get too philosophical. Let's go into the history of Dragon Ball. The first time I ever remembered watching, and I can tell you guys my exact memory, I was about like 6 or 7 years old, right around there. And it was around the time when they were starting to distribute Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z for the first time. So this would have been like 95, 96, 97, somewhere in that range. And I remember, I believe it was on UPN. I can't recall exactly, but there were a lot of really interesting and strange cartoons I liked when I was a kid, but Dragon Ball was one of them, and it was that time when they were starting to get past the anime boom, and so they were experimenting with bringing these popular shows over here that did well obviously in Japan and in Europe, and testing them out over here. And of course, obviously, one of the first big ones they tried to market was Dragon Ball. They wanted to try and do it chronologically, which makes the most sense. However, as some people may know, Dragon Ball did not test very well. They put it on very early in the morning, and it just didn't catch on. So obviously the time slot didn't really help it, and I guess American tastes for kids weren't quite as interested, because the first like 5-10 episodes of Dragon Ball, there's a lot of innuendos, and there's a lot of strange things going on. It's very different from your standard American cartoon, I think, in a lot of ways, so maybe that's one reason why I didn't catch on right away. Plus, with the early days of dubbing and translating scripts and everything, obviously it was very different from the original show. My first experience with Dragon Ball was the episode where Goku ran into Master Roshi, and he was being pursued by Emperor Pilaf and his henchman, Shu and Mai, and they tracked him down to Roshi's island. They just missed him. They were interrogating Roshi about, have you seen Goku? Where is he? Looking for the Dragon Balls, obviously. And Roshi would pretend like, oh, no, I haven't seen him. And they leave the island on their boat, and Roshi poked a hole in there, so they sunk. And really, that's the only memory I have of it. I actually just came across that. I don't know. It's kind of amazing what the human brain can really absorb, even at that young of an age. I mean, I like to think I was a fairly intelligent and intuitive kid, so I was able to understand vaguely what was going on, because the next thing I ever saw was, of course, the first episode of Dragon Ball Z, which, after Dragon Ball failed after like the first 10 episodes, they decided to start with Z, which, of course, picked up after a couple years, especially once it hit Toonami years later. Even those early days, though, Dragon Ball Z, of course, did do well with the ratings, and it became the whole phenomenon that we know, and now it's a freaking massive fan base, and people have nerdy little debates about it on YouTube. So, whole evolution process of the series kind of mimics the life of a person or a culture. A lot of interesting parallels. Forgive me, it's very late and I'm sleepy, but I'm gonna get this video out to you guys, so forgive me if I'm a little loopy. Yes, then of course the next episode I saw, I don't know if it was months or a year or two later, but I saw the first episode of Dragon Ball Z, and I don't know how. I guess it was because of the character design, but it's kind of funny. I guess because it took place on the same island, the location didn't change very much for me. So obviously, I didn't have to make too many massive connections. But somehow I understood that it was the same person before. Goku had grown up. He had a son, and he was some kind of superhero or some sort of fighter or something. And this random weird alien guy comes down, and everybody can fly. And there's this green guy that apparently hates him, and they all have these weird superpowers, and they got to save his son. I'm just like, I can't pretend like I understood what was going on, but it was so bizarre and interesting and kind of cool that I kind of wanted to tune in. And I didn't really follow it, I think, like every Saturday, not that I can remember, but it was one of those things where I would catch random episodes of the Saiyan saga over various periods of time, and I was interested in it. And it ended the run there, I believe, after they defeated Vegeta. So the thing about Dragon Ball Z for me and Dragon Ball in general is that you'll find that, for me, the history of viewing it was filled with these gaps, because when I stopped watching it, I was probably like 8 or 9, and then I think I forgot about Dragon Ball Z. I had no idea what it was. And then I think around the time I got to about 3rd or 4th grade, 5th grade, around that period of time, I was about 10 or 11 years old. My mother had to work out of town, so basically we went to our neighbor's house in the morning, which was really early in the morning, so that we could catch the bus over there, because before and after school, our neighbor would watch my sister and I while my mom was coming back from work. So basically, for about a year or two, I'm going to say that probably would have been 4th and 5th grade, my early mornings consisted of watching cartoons. And then I remembered being over there, and I found out that the kids that resided there actually liked this show too, and I just remembered seeing it on the TV, and it was actually the episode where Gohan and Krillin ran into those orphans whose planet had been destroyed by Frieza. And I was like, this is really interesting. I remember it's Dragon Ball Z. I get to watch this again. And so over there, I actually got to catch pretty much in chronological order, because I used to tape it sometimes, along with things like Beast Wars and Historia and Batman the Animated Series and actually Twilight Zone, interestingly enough. A lot of other shows like that. It was actually, of course, one of my favorite shows. And I got to watch pretty much the whole Namek saga up until the point where the Ginyu Force arrived and Goku started fighting them. And then then I didn't see it for a while after that, because I got to middle school. And I forget why there was a bit of a gap there. And I remembered, okay, I really was starting to get into Dragon Ball Z at this point. I was like, okay, I really like this show. This was back during the Ocean dub. So, of course, I was really used to the way the soundtrack was, the way the characters' voices sounded, the way the characters acted, and some of the weird editing choices they made. So you know all about that. But so the early days of Dragon Ball Z were the Ocean dub, which I do kind of like. It is cheesy, but it does have a unique attribute to it that is kind of cool. It's definitely the American comic book idea, but just put on Dragon Ball. So it's interesting. Like, I think Vegeta, like voiced by Brian Drummond, for instance, he's great for a young evil Vegeta. I'll be honest. Like, that just as an example. So it's just very weird how different the atmosphere was. But I thought the music was great. Like the intensity when Frieza showed up, for instance, or when somebody was about to die. I mean, it was good. There were good things about the Ocean dub. But anyway, I was getting into Dragon Ball Z, and this was the point where, God bless my mother, I started to ask her, hey, can I watch this show? It's called Dragon Ball Z. I want to rent these videos. And yes, this is back when there were movie rental stores and things were on VHSs. And so I found out when I went to the movie store, because I always liked to watch movies when I was a kid, even of all different kinds of varieties. And I found out, I could rent the Dragon Ball Z tapes. There were 3 or 4 episodes per tape. And I could actually pick up pretty much where I left off. And sometimes I'd buy them at Best Buy or one of the retail stores. I remember the first time, it was interesting because right at the point where I got back into it is right at the point where Funimation took over doing the in-house dubbing. And so I watched it. I remember it picking up right at the next episode when Berta and Jace were going after Goku, saving Vegeta, Krillin, and Gohan from the rest of the Ginyu Force after he just defeated Raccoon. And the voices were totally different. The music was totally different. And I was like, whoa. But the Ginyu Force theme picked up from the Bruce Falconer soundtrack, and I just kind of knew in my mind, wow, this is awesome. This is amazing. And somehow in my mind I also thought, I guess I didn't quite realize that I don't know. I knew that it was different voice actors, but I almost felt like they did it on purpose. I didn't, of course, understand back then about different companies and distributors and different scripts changing things. So for me, I just thought, okay, I guess they're changing the style because this is when things are getting really intense. Which you could argue, yes, Goku fighting the Ginyu Force is where things get really intense. But then again, there are a lot of transitions. But still, I'll never forget that complete change in tone. It seemed much more dark, much more epic. That techno metal soundtrack. And the tape I purchased too was unedited, so it was the first time I saw the blood, and there was some minor cursing, I believe. So, for me, it was really another transition. And, of course, I pretty much rented the rest of the Frieza saga from that, and the Garlic Jr. saga as well. And, oh man, I was really into it. I remember just like eating it up, man. I just remember like having to get the next one. I was addicted. I had to find out what was going to happen with Frieza. I just remember being so absorbed in the fights, thinking like, this is the most awesome, epic thing I've ever seen. Probably when I was like, I don't know, 11, 12 years old. When I got to middle school, that was the point where I remembered I actually started getting my mom to buy me the tapes. So if anybody really wants to wonder, I do think that the Android and Cell arc is probably one of, if not the best written part of Dragon Ball Z. Maybe all of Dragon Ball. I will admit the King Piccolo arc is really good. But the reason I think I have a little bias for that is because around this time, at the height of my love of Dragon Ball Z, that's when I had these tapes and I was able to actually keep them and watch them over and over and over again. And I didn't have cable TV, so I was only able to sparsely see these things up to this point, and here I was able to actually watch these over and over and over again. And it was glorious. So literally, from the point where Trunks arrives to defeat Frieza, all the way up to Cell's perfect form, I had those episodes. And I watched them over and over and over again until I was about 14, 15. Then I got to high school, and my interest in Dragon Ball Z kind of waned. It's kind of like, that's when I actually started to really get into comics, superhero comics, started reading Spider-Man, Daredevil, Batman, and got more into American comics, and also started to really get a lot more into movies and television, like focusing on the Scorseses and the Francis Ford Coppolas, and watching stuff like Without a Trace and CSI. I just kind of started to get different interests, and then eventually later on I get into gaming and stuff. And of course, all the other things like, concerned with girls and aspirations about growing up. So to be fair, I kind of never stopped liking Dragon Ball Z though, because also around this time, which is really interesting, is that as I was like starting to lose interest in Dragon Ball Z, or at least not watch it as much, my sister started to get into this thing called anime, watching stuff like Inuyasha, Fushigi Yugi, Ranma 1/2, Cardcaptor Sakura, Ceres, Pre-Tier, a bunch of these types of shows. And eventually I kind of learned about anime and learned that Dragon Ball Z was anime. I never quite made that connection, but somewhere along the way it happened. I started to get more into anime in general, and then eventually got into Adult Swim, and then there was Fullmetal Alchemist, Samurai Champloo, Paranoid Agent, S-Cryad, and there you go. And that was kind of the beginning of my foray into anime for a while, and I was really into anime as well, along with everything else that I was getting into around the time I was entering high school and into my later teen years. So Dragon Ball Z was kind of once again, that very long bridge to finally get me into anime in general. So Dragon Ball Z basically left my life for a couple years there. And like I said, I always kind of liked it. I remember around this was around the time that it would kind of come up in conversation with people that were into anime that would occasionally bring up Dragon Ball Z. Man, that's overrated. That's stupid. Man, these other series are so much better, which to some degree, I thought so. But I always really liked Dragon Ball Z. And especially I think it was worse with people that really didn't know much about anime. They would start talking about. In fact, I remember, I think it was actually ninth grade. I remembered I was talking to some guy. I think it was a music class or something. And I remember we were talking briefly just about something random, and he was saying, I used to really be into that show Dragon Ball Z. I used to watch those tapes over and over again. I'm thinking, wow, he's talking about this like this was a really long time ago, and I only stopped really doing this maybe like a couple months ago. I'm like, I guess I was secretly a little embarrassed that I was still so obsessed with the cartoon, not that long ago. I don't know. I just remember that moment. I guess that's one reason why I kind of kept it in the back of my head. And anytime I met somebody that was interested in anime and Dragon Ball Z came up, it seemed like for a while there was kind of almost this like hatred of it. I remember that some of the earlier YouTube videos, there were people making fun of the problems with Dragon Ball Z, and this was also before I think a lot of people knew much about it. Dragon Ball Z, kind of deep in the back of my mind, always kind of liked it. Sometimes would talk about how awesome it was with people that really did like it, but never really sat down and watched it or anything ever again. Then, I don't know why, it was actually my sophomore year of college. I was ending community college and transitioning to a bigger school, and I was taking some summer classes to finish up, and it was towards the end of summer, and I went into the library sometimes to kill time. I just decided, you know what, I remembered that one thing I liked about Dragon Ball Z was how awesome the music was. I was like, man, that I think one thing that was really incredible about that series was that it had a great soundtrack, the Bruce Falconer soundtrack, which is all I knew at the time. I decided to just listen to some of the tracks. I said Dragon Ball Z music, and I found a lot of these classic themes, like the Ginyu Force theme, Cell's theme, and all that stuff. And it just took me straight back, like this huge burst of nostalgia. Like I just felt like I was 10 years old again, 15 years old again. And, at this time in my life when I was transitioning, I guess, and, you're always thinking about the future, sometimes it was nice to kind of get anchored into the simpler times when you could just get completely absorbed in something because you had, I guess, much fewer concerns. And I just remembered it took me back, and I was like, I think I'm actually going to see if I can try to watch it again and see if it holds up. And I would slowly start watching some of the older stuff, and I just remembered I started watching the old sagas, and I'm like, I never really got past Cell's perfect form. That's where I stopped. And so I just kind of decided, maybe I should read up on. I mean, I knew what happened. I saw random pieces of the Buu saga at friends' houses and random parts of GT even, and even a couple episodes of Dragon Ball again, which I was able to appreciate just randomly throughout my younger years. I just decided to actually start buying them again. I actually decided to get some of the full seasons, and I rewatched the Frieza saga, and I watched the androids and part of the Cell arc, and then I finally finished the Cell arc. Yeah, like literally only like a couple years ago. And that's when I decided to actually check out the rest of it, check out the massive gaps in the Majin Buu saga that I missed, and then to actually learn more about it, learn about the different dubs, learn about the original manga, and even get into Dragon Ball, because I had really not watched much Dragon Ball, and then I learned about watching it in the different dubs and thinking, and then I found out about Dragon Ball Z Kai. Once I got into Dragon Ball Z Kai, it gave me a whole new appreciation for how good the series really was. It's interesting because, in addition to that, it led me to read the manga, and then it led me to actually watch Dragon Ball. And I remember when I watched Dragon Ball and some of the movies that I never saw, I was blown away. I was really sucked into it again because I was actually experiencing Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, and was thinking, wow, this really does hold up. It's not purely nostalgia. There's stuff I've never seen before. There's a lot of things about this world and these characters and what it's really about. And I just got so more sucked into the fandom than I ever was. I mean, I was looking up random music about it, the different video games, the different interpretations and spin-offs, and I just got really back into the world of Dragon Ball again. In addition to this, around this time, I kind of was still into anime. I was watching a couple shows like Speedgrapher, Basilisk here and there, but it was kind of like to the point where I was only watching like maybe a series or two a year. Really, like, I wasn't super into anime, but then I got into Dragon Ball, and that got me interested in even more series and learning more about anime. It was also around this time that I started to become more interested in online reviewers like people at Channel Awesome, like Nostalgia Critic, Linkara, all those guys, and also just the YouTube community with people having all kinds of discussions about fandom. And there was this one guy, I believe he was called the Beard of Power, or Path of Geofrida. He has multiple names, but he did this one video about a kind of a sort of a analysis on Dragon Ball as a whole. And this was right around the time where there was kind of a big flame war online, where the big debate for like about a year or two was Naruto versus Dragon Ball Z specifically, which is better. and there were a lot of Naruto haters and Dragon Ball haters just throwing shots at each other. And this guy just basically laid it on the table saying how there was a lot more going on in the plot and with the character development than people often give it credit for. I also found the Anime Heroes Dragon Ball Z movie reviews and thought they were really, really good. And I was thinking, Dragon Ball has this big fandom, or Dragon Ball Z specifically, but around that time, and that would have been like around 2011, 2012, I was thinking, there really aren't that many people that think about Dragon Ball very critically and actually take some serious analysis. And I was thinking, why don't I put some of my college years and critical thinking skills to use? And hey, I write papers and research at that time. I was basically in my last semester of college there for my bachelor's, and I said, you know what, heck with it. I'm going to do a YouTube channel, and I'm actually going to have some character analysis of Dragon Ball Z characters. And started making some videos. That led me to start talking about more anime series and other things that I liked, and then I actually met Anime Hero and Anime Green and Zoro Fanboy and Dead and Blaze and Kai and Lunar and Shot and all those people, and I slowly got absorbed into it, and then I went into the Green Clan and started making a bunch of videos, and then we became the Phantom Group, and before you know it, I had a decent amount of subscribers and a little bit of a following and a bunch of people to talk about stuff with, and yeah. So basically, as I mentioned, I think in one of my previous videos, getting back into Dragon Ball after all those years actually helped get me back into anime, got me making YouTube videos, and actually getting to the point where I am now making this video talking to you guys about it. So it's really interesting, and it all started, among the many other things in my life in that particular point of time, it all started because of that kid on the cloud going out to find some old guy on an island, and the old guy poking a hole in the boat of some imp and his talking dog and some random woman, and me kind of being interested when I saw those same characters again in a completely different scenario. And the fandom was born, and my love of this really fun, interesting, impactful series begun. So, I could do literally a 5-hour video probably talking about all the things I love about Dragon Ball and why it's awesome. And I'll do many more videos on it, I'm sure, in the future. But yeah, that was basically my little history of Dragon Ball and me, and how I discovered the series, and why it's important to me, and how it got me where I am now. I still love it. I still have a much bigger appreciation for it, I think, than I used to in a lot of ways. Though it's funny, in some ways I don't think I was as big a fan as I was when I was a kid. It's like maybe I am just as big a fan, but it's just a totally different experience. So if you guys are interested, I'd like to hear what you guys have in regards to your experiences with the series, and if you want to do a video about it, that's great. I'd love to hear your responses and your stories. If you feel like going in depth as me, that's fine, but you don't have to go that in depth. But still, yeah, I wanted to share that with you guys, and I'll probably be doing actually some more videos in the future similar to this, and each week I'm going to be doing a similar topic on anime or something related. So expect that pretty consistently, usually Wednesday or Thursday, and Monday, of course, I do my news videos. So check out the Phantom Group, check out Film Fanatics, and yeah, take it easy, guys. Have a good night.